What would you do if the only way to escape your wedding was to marry a monster instead? On the night before she is sold to a brutal alpha through a marriage contract she cannot refuse, a desperate noblewoman flees into the underworld and offers her fortune to the most feared, scarred mercenary she can find, asking him to stand beside her as her husband and destroy the ceremony. She thinks she is hiring a weapon, a dangerous stranger powerful enough to protect her for one day. But when that man walks into her wedding in royal armor and the entire kingdom drops to its knees, she realizes she has tied herself to someone far more terrifying and far more powerful than she ever imagined. What begins as a desperate bargain soon ignites a war, a forbidden bond, and a love that could remake a kingdom. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Now let's begin the story. The night before the wedding, Ashcroft Estate didn't feel like a home. It felt like a shrine. Wind rapped hard against the tall windows as if trying to get in. The hallways of stone were too bright, too polished, every candle set at the exact same height, every silver candelabra arranged with obsessive care. The entire manor gleamed the way a stage gleams before a performance, the kind of perfection that only exists when someone has decided the audience must not see the cracks. In Evelyn's chamber, the servants moved around her with the quiet discipline of people who had learned that silence was safer than honesty. "Hold still, my lady," one of them murmured. Evelyn stood on a small platform while two maids adjusted the final layers of white fabric. The wedding gown was beautiful in the way chains could be beautiful, expensive, ornate, designed to impress. The material was heavy across her shoulders. The corset beneath it squeezed until she had to breathe shallowly, as if the dress itself wanted to teach her how to endure. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, at the pale face, the carefully arranged hair, the bright curve of pearls that rested at her throat like a collar. She didn't recognize the woman looking back. Her lips parted before she could stop herself. "Do I look like a bride?" she said softly, "or like an animal tied with ribbon before it's sold?" The maids froze. No one answered. Their eyes dropped to the floor. Their silence was not cruelty. It was fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of being overheard. Fear of the way a house like Ashcroft could punish anyone who forgot their place. One maid finally whispered, "You look very fine, my lady." Evelyn watched her in the mirror, watched the trembling hands smoothing the fabric near her waist. Fine. That was what they called women right before they were traded away. Someone in the hallway mentioned Lord Magnus Fortain's name, just a passing comment about his arrival time tomorrow, about the seating arrangement, about how the Fortain guards preferred their own line of sight. The moment Evelyn heard it, something inside her tightened so hard it hurt. Her wolf, quiet all day, caged behind manners and training, shifted in her chest like a creature waking from sleep. A low, instinctive growl rose behind her ribs. Her skin prickled cold. The fine hairs on her arms lifted as if the air itself had changed. Magnus. Even his name felt like a scent she couldn't tolerate. The older maids would have called it childish hysteria. The priest would call it nerves. Evelyn knew the truth. Her wolf recognized a predator. Not the kind that hunted deer, the kind that hunted lives. "You'll have to turn slightly," a maid said, adjusting the bodice. "Lord Magnus prefers," Evelyn flinched. The maid stopped, face paling. "Forgive me, my lady." Evelyn swallowed. "He prefers what?" The maid looked helplessly at the others. No one wanted to be the one to say it, because everyone knew what tomorrow truly was. It wasn't only a wedding, it was a claiming. Wolf law did not treat marriage as paper and ceremony alone. It treated it as ownership written into blood and moonlight. Tomorrow in the great hall, Magnus Fortain would stand in front of the witnesses and the priest of the moon. He would take Evelyn's hand, he would speak the words, and then when the vows were sealed, he would bite. A precise bite at the junction of neck and shoulder where the skin was thin and the nerves close enough to carry the bond deep. A mark that the moon law would recognize, a mark that made a woman claimed. Once claimed, a bond like that could not simply be undone with regret or rebellion. It bound her to his pack. It bound her to his authority. It bound her to his instincts. It made escape nearly impossible. Evelyn lifted a hand, touching the bare skin at her collarbone, imagining teeth there. If he marks me, she whispered, barely audible, everything ends. A maid crossed herself in the old way, the gesture almost invisible. In the mirror, Evelyn's eyes looked too large, too dark. A frightened woman wearing the costume of a bride. A sacrifice dressed in silk. Leave, Evelyn said suddenly. The maids hesitated. My lady, leave, she repeated sharper this time. They obeyed immediately, withdrawing like shadows. The door shut. The room fell quiet except for the wind and the faint crackle of candles. Evelyn stood alone in the gown, staring at herself until her chest ached. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She stepped out of the dress. She loosened the corset until she could breathe again, and she walked to the window and pressed her forehead to the cold glass. Tomorrow. She had to survive tomorrow, or she had to destroy it. She could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Magnus's hand on her wrist, strong, possessive. The grip of a man who did not ask permission because he'd been taught he didn't have to. She saw her father's expression when he announced the engagement, calm, satisfied, as if he'd completed a business transaction. She heard the whispers of the estate. She's fortunate. She should be grateful. House Fortain is powerful. Grateful. As if gratitude could make her skin stop crawling. Evelyn left her chamber in the dead of night, barefoot, on the stone floor, wrapped in a dark robe. She moved through the corridor with the ease of someone who'd grown up memorizing where the boards creaked and which doors squealed. The estate was awake in its own way. Not with laughter or warmth, but with preparation. Servants carrying bundles, guards exchanging quiet instructions, torches shifting as patrols passed. She wandered without a plan, driven by the need to breathe air that wasn't trapped inside her room. That was how she found herself near her father's study. The door was not fully closed. Light spilled from the crack onto the hallway floor. And voices. Evelyn slowed. Her heart thumped harder. She knew her father worked late. She knew he'd be up finalizing documents. But the second voice, that deeper, slower voice, made her stomach twist. Magnus. She should have walked away. She didn't. She stood just beside the door, careful to keep her shadow out of the light, and listened. Magnus chuckled, a low sound of amusement. The girl is prettier than I expected, he said. Ashcroft blood is worth more than her face, but I won't complain. Evelyn's breath caught. Her father answered without emotion. You will have an heir within the first year. She has been raised to obey. Magnus's voice warmed with satisfaction. Good. After she gives me the first one, I'll move her to North Manor. She won't need to appear at court again. Evelyn's vision narrowed. North Manor? It was spoken of in rumors, an estate deep in Vortain territory where wives vanished. Her father didn't protest. He sounded practical. How many children do you want before you let her rest? Cedric asked. Magnus laughed softly. Depends on her health. For a moment, Evelyn didn't understand what she'd heard. It felt unreal, like language spoken in a dream. Then her mind clicked. They weren't discussing a marriage. They were discussing output, production. A body used to generate heirs and then stored away. A broodmare. Evelyn stumbled backward, a sound almost escaping her throat. She clapped a hand over her mouth, pressing her palm hard enough to hurt. The hallway tilted. Her body went cold, as if all her blood had run out of her in one rush. Inside the study, the men continued speaking details about lands, alliances, trade routes, as if they hadn't just planned the rest of her life like it was a ledger entry. Evelyn backed away, shaking. Her feet moved on instinct, carrying her down the hallway, around a corner, and into the darkness of her own corridor. She reached her chamber, closed the door, and leaned against it as if she had to hold it shut against the world. Her lungs would not fill properly. Air came in shallow, broken gasps. She expected tears. None came. Her eyes burned, but her body was too shocked to release anything. One thought repeated with relentless clarity. They will keep me until I have given them enough children. And then they will hide me. She slid down the door and sat on the floor, staring into nothing. Tomorrow wasn't a wedding. Tomorrow was a life sentence. The knock came softly. Lady Evelyn Tessa. Evelyn opened the door and the maid stepped inside, taking one look at her face and going pale. My Lady Tessa whispered, reaching for her hands. What happened? Evelyn's voice came out flat. He's not marrying me. He's buying me. Tessa's eyes widened. Lord Magnus? I heard them. Evelyn said each word steady, as if the steadiness was all that kept her from breaking. My father, Magnus. They spoke about me like I was a thing, like I was livestock. Tessa swallowed hard. What did they say? Evelyn met her gaze. They said, I will give him an heir within a year, and after that he will move me to North Manor. He said I won't need to appear at court again. Tessa's hand tightened on Evelyn's fingers. No. And my father asked how many children he wants before he lets me rest. Evelyn finished. Her mouth twisted, something bitter and sharp rising in her throat. As if I'm a horse. Tessa's face crumpled, her eyes glistened. Then she straightened as if grief could wait. We can run, she whispered quickly. Tonight, right now. Evelyn's heart kicked. Yes, she said, yes, we run. Tessa moved with a sudden urgency, crossing to the wardrobe, pulling out a dark cloak, shoving it into Evelyn's hands. You'll need this, and boots, and money. Anything you can carry? Evelyn went to a hidden drawer and pulled out a pouch heavy with gold coins and a small velvet box of jewels, pieces she'd saved over years, gifts she'd never worn, treasures her mother left her. Tessa gathered papers from a small desk, travel permits, a seal ring, the kind of documents that might matter beyond Ashcroft walls. They worked fast, whispering their movements sharp with fear. But as Evelyn tied the pouch to her waist, Tessa hesitated. My lady, she said, voice tightening. There's something you must understand. Evelyn looked at her. What? Tessa's throat bobbed. The moon contract. Evelyn's jaw clenched. What about it? The betrothal contract with House Fortain, your father already registered it. Under Moon Registry, Tessa said carefully, as if speaking too loudly would summon the law itself. It's not only a noble agreement, it's wolf law. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Tessa continued softer now. If you run after a moon contract is signed, they have the right to hunt. Evelyn stared at her. Hunt, Tessa nodded, eyes wet. Pack Fortain can pursue you as a runaway bride, and if they catch you before the next moon cycle, Lord Magnus has the right to claim you publicly. Evelyn's fingers went numb around the pouch. Public claiming was worse than the marriage itself. It was humiliation written into ritual. A woman dragged back in front of witnesses and marked like property as punishment for resisting. So even if I run, Evelyn said slowly, I'm only delaying. Tessa's voice cracked. Unless another man claims you first under lawful moon witness, they won't stop. Evelyn's mind raced. Another man. That wasn't possible. Who would marry her overnight? Who would risk Vortain wrath? Who would oppose a contract signed with Ashcroft and Moon Registry? The room filled with silence, the kind that felt like a wall closing in. Evelyn's wolf stirred, not with fear this time, but with something sharper. Survival. A wild idea rose inside her like a flame. If another man marries me before the ceremony, Evelyn said, words coming quickly, the contract becomes void. Tessa blinked. If it's a lawful vow witnessed by the moon, yes. Evelyn stepped closer, gripping Tessa's wrists. Then that's what I will do. Tessa's face drained. My lady. I don't need love, Evelyn said, voice hardening into resolve. I don't need devotion. I don't need kindness. I need power. Tessa shook her head, horrified. That's madness. Evelyn's eyes flared. No. Madness is staying here and letting them lock me in a breeding house. She released Tessa's hands and turned toward the chest where her valuables were hidden. She pulled out everything she could carry, gold jewels. A ring with Ashcroft crest a necklace of rare stones. It made a heavy pile on the table. Tessa stared at it. You'll pay someone. Yes, Evelyn said. I will buy myself a husband. Tessa's lips parted. Who would accept? Evelyn's gaze sharpened. Someone who needs gold. Someone who doesn't care about Ashcroft or Vortain. Someone dangerous enough that they won't dare touch me. Tessa's eyes flickered with understanding and fear. Border tavern, she whispered. The outlaw district. Evelyn nodded once. Then she pulled on the dark cloak, tied the pouch at her waist, and turned toward the door. Tessa grabbed her arm. My lady, if you do this, you might be trading one cage for another. Evelyn looked at her, and for the first time since overhearing her father, her eyes held fire. At least this time she said, I will choose the cage. And she left. Border taverns were not meant for women like Evelyn Ashcroft. The moment she stepped through the door, the noise dropped a fraction, not silent, but watchful. The air was thick with smoke and sweat and the sharp bite of cheap liquor. Men laughed at dice tables. Outcasts in patch cloaks leaned against walls. Scarred soldiers drank in corners, eyes measuring the room the way predators measured prey. Evelyn kept her hood low, but she could feel the stares anyway. They all knew she didn't belong. She walked forward, forcing her steps to stay steady, even though her heart hammered like it wanted to escape her body. Then she saw him. He sat alone in the darkest corner where the light barely reached, broad shoulders beneath a black cloak, a hand resting on the hilt of a sword as if it belonged there, a scar that ran along his jaw and disappeared into the collar of his coat. No one sat near him. It wasn't because the space was reserved. It was because something about him warned people away. Predator? Evelyn's wolf lifted its head inside her, alert, bristling, not with disgust, but with wary recognition. A drunk man near the bar muttered to his companion loud enough for Evelyn to hear. "If she wants to hire the devil, he's sitting over there." Evelyn swallowed. Her fingers tightened around the pouch at her waist. Then she walked toward the devil. As she neared the man, looked up. His eyes caught the faint torchlight, and they weren't brown or blue or gray. They were gold. Not the warm gold of coin, but molten amber, sharp, feral, unsettlingly alive. For 1 second, Evelyn forgot to breathe. The man's gaze swept over her from hood to boots, not leering, not hungry, simply assessing as if he could see every weakness she tried to hide. "A noblewoman," he said, voice low, edged with amusement. In a place like this at midnight, his mouth barely moved when he spoke. Controlled, dangerous. "Either you're stupid," he continued, "or you're desperate." Evelyn lifted her chin. "I'm hoping it's desperation." Something flickered in his eyes, interest. Perhaps? Or surprise. He didn't invite her to sit. Evelyn sat anyway. She unfastened the pouch and set it on the table. Then the velvet box of jewels. Then the ring. The sound of heavy metal against wood drew attention. Several conversations nearby paused. Eyes shifted toward them. Evelyn didn't look away. She met the man's gaze and spoke clearly with a steadiness she didn't entirely feel. "Stand beside me tomorrow as my husband," she said, "and everything here is yours." Silence. The man stared at the pile of wealth as if it meant nothing, or as if it meant something else entirely. Then his gaze returned to her face. "You're proposing to a stranger," he said slowly. "Yes," Evelyn replied. "I'm buying freedom." His expression didn't change, but his voice turned colder. "And if I kill you and take the gold," Evelyn's pulse spiked. Fear surged hot, then icy, but she didn't move. She leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on his. "Then at least," she said, voice trembling only at the edges, "I die before I'm sold." The tavern seemed to hold its breath. The man's lips twitched, almost a laugh, almost disbelief. "You understand what you're offering?" he asked. Evelyn swallowed. "More than anyone?" He tilted his head. "Name." "Evelyn." A pause. Then he said, "Cale." It should have felt like nothing. A name. A sound. Instead, the moment he said it, her wolf shifted inside her like it recognized something older than logic. Kyle slid the pile of gold an inch back toward her. "I haven't said yes," he said. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Then he added, "But I want to hear the whole story." They spoke quietly, heads close over the table while the tavern noise recovered around them. Evelyn told him everything: her father's contract, Magnus's plans, North Manor, the claiming ceremony, the hunt. She expected Cale to react with mockery. He didn't. He listened like stone listens to storms. Still, silent, dangerous. But she saw the tension in his jaw tighten at certain words, saw his fingers flex once on the table as if he had to remind himself to keep them still. When she finished, her voice had gone raw, so she asked, forcing herself to keep her tone sharp, "Will you help me?" Cale's gaze held hers for a long moment. "I don't pretend to be anyone's husband," he said. Evelyn went cold. "Then why did you—" "I don't make false vows under the moon," he continued, voice lowering. "Wolf law only recognizes what is real." Evelyn's throat tightened. "You're saying I'm saying if I stand beside you—" Kyle said, leaning forward just enough that his shadow fell over her hands. Then you are my wife under moon law. No games. Eveline's heart pounded so hard it hurt. You want me to marry a man I don't know, she whispered. Kyle's eyes narrowed. You were going to marry Magnus Vortain. Evelyn flinched as if struck. Kyle's voice turned almost cruel in its honesty. The only difference is that this time you choose. Silence stretched between them. Evelyn stared at the pile of gold and jewels, everything she owned in the world. She had thought she was purchasing protection. Now she realized she was purchasing a bond. A real one. Kyle's gaze didn't soften. He didn't reassure her with pretty lies. He simply waited as if he respected her enough to let her decide. Evelyn swallowed. And you will protect me, she asked, voice smaller than she wanted. Kyle's eyes held hers, unblinking. Until my heart stops, he said. Something in the way he said it made it sound like more than a promise, like a vow he'd already decided belonged to her. Evelyn's fingers trembled. Then she nodded once. Then I choose you. For the first time, Kale's expression shifted, not into warmth, not into tenderness, but into something that looked almost like relief. He stood. Come. They left the tavern through the back, into a clearing outside the border district where the trees opened to sky. The moon hung high, bright enough to turn Evelyn's breath into silver. The air felt different here, older charged, as if the land itself remembered vows. Kyle drew a knife from his belt. Evelyn stiffened. Kyle didn't look at her as he spoke. A moon vow cannot be taken back. I know she lied. Kyle cut his palm without hesitation. Blood welled dark against pale skin. He held the knife out to her. Evelyn took it. Her hand shook, but she didn't pause. She cut her palm. It stung sharply, a pain that anchored her to the moment. Kyle stepped closer. They clasped hands palm to palm, blood mixing. Heat surged up Evelyn's arm, not just from skin contact, but from something deeper. A pulse, a recognition. Kyle spoke in a language she didn't understand, ancient, rough, the sounds carrying weight. Wolf tongue. Old rite. Then he shifted into the common tongue voice, low and steady. Under the moon's witness, he said, I take you as my wife by your own will. Evelyn's throat tightened. Her voice came out clear anyway. Under the moon's witness, she said, I choose you as my husband by my own will. The air seemed to thicken. Something invisible pressed against Evelyn's skin like a sudden rush of warm wind. The bond flared. Not a mark, not a bite, but a thread of recognition, a seal of law and magic. Evelyn gasped softly. Kyle's grip tightened, steadying her. For a moment they were too close, blood and breath and moonlight between them. Kyle's gaze dropped to her neck. Evelyn felt it instantly, the shift in him, the subtle change in the air. His wolf wanted more, wanted to claim, to bite, to mark. Kyle's jaw clenched hard. Don't stand that close to me, he said, voice rougher now, unless you're ready for everything that comes with it. Evelyn's face warmed. She wasn't sure if it was embarrassment or the bond humming under her skin. She stepped back half a step, breathing unsteadily. Kale turned away as if to give himself space, and in that small movement, Evelyn understood something that frightened her more than Magnus. Kale was controlling himself, not because he was weak, because he was strong enough to choose restraint. They didn't make it far. On the path away from the border clearing, shadows moved between trees. Evelyn smelled them before she saw them. Male aggressive pack scent threaded with iron and dominance. Vortain. Torches flared ahead. Men emerged, armored, faces hard. The leader stepped forward, voice cold and official. Lady Evelyn, he called. By order of House Ashcroft, you are to return. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Kale moved in front of her, immediately body a wall. A few of the hunters laughed when they saw him. You ran with a mercenary, one mocked, a noble bride with a stray dog. Kale didn't raise his voice. Last warning, he said, calm as a blade. Leave. They laughed again. Then they charged. Kyle didn't draw his sword at first. His eyes flashed gold, brighter, sharper. The air around him seemed to ripple. Evelyn's wolf recoiled, then lifted its head in awe. Kyle's nails lengthened into claws, not fully shifted, but enough to reveal what he truly was. Dominance exploded outward from him like a wave. Two hunters faltered mid-step as if their bodies suddenly remembered fear. The leader snarled, forcing himself forward. Kyle moved. Fast, brutal, inhuman. He struck with claws and elbow and the weight of someone who'd fought wars, not tavern brawls. Hunters went down before they understood what hit them. Evelyn backed away, instinctively heart-hammering. One hunter lunged toward her. Reaching Cale was there instantly a blur. The man collapsed. Silence fell in broken pieces as the last of the hunters either fled or lay unmoving. Cal stood in the center of the path, breathing hard, claws still extended, eyes burning gold. Then one remaining hunter, wounded, terrified, lifted his head and finally saw Cale's face clearly under moonlight. All color drained from him. He scrambled backward, then dropped to his knees. Me prince," he stammered. The words hit the air like a weapon. Evelyn froze. Kyle's body went still. Rowan appeared from the trees as if he'd been there the whole time, his movements smooth and controlled. He struck the kneeling hunter unconscious with the butt of his weapon and dragged him back into shadow as if erasing the moment. More men emerged behind Rowan warriors in dark armor, disciplined, quiet, not mercenaries. They all lowered their heads toward Cale in silent acknowledgement. Evelyn stared. Her blood turned ice. She looked at Cale, at the scar along his jaw, at the gold eyes, at the way these warriors treated him like a ruler. "Prince," she whispered. Cale's gaze landed on her, and for the first time since the vow, she saw something in him that looked reluctant. Not fear, regret. "You told me you were a mercenary," Evelyn said, voice tight. Kyle wiped blood from his knuckles with a slow motion that felt too controlled. "I told you I would protect you," he said evenly. "I never told you I was only a mercenary." Evelyn's hands curled into fists. "Then who are you?" Kyle held her gaze a long moment. "A man your enemies should fear," he said again, quieter now. "That is not an answer?" And right now, Kyle replied, "It's all you need." Before Evelyn could push further, Rowan stepped forward. "We have to move," Rowan said, voice urgent but respectful. "More Vortain men will come." Kyle turned away, forcing motion into the moment. He gestured for Evelyn to follow. She did because she had no choice, but her mind was on fire with questions. Prince. What prince? And what had she just done under the moon? Imagine paying a scarred stranger to become your husband under the moon, only to hear someone fall to their knees and call him prince seconds later. What would you do if the man you hired to save your life turned out to be royalty? Let us know what you'd do, and don't forget to subscribe before we jump into the most shocking part of the story. They traveled hard through the night, taking the longer routes to avoid pursuit. Evelyn rode beside Cale, silent, her heart still pounding. She wanted to demand truth, but something about the way Cale rode steady, focused as if he carried an entire burden behind his eyes, held her back. At dawn, they stopped in a narrow hollow where trees shielded them from view. Kyle dismounted first, then helped Evelyn down without asking. His hand lingered at her waist for half a second longer than necessary. Evelyn felt it through the bond like a spark. She stepped away quickly, pretending she hadn't. Kyle threw a cloak over her shoulders when he noticed her shivering. "I don't need your pity," Evelyn snapped. Cale's mouth quirked. "Good, because I don't pity anyone." Then he nudged her closer to the small fire he'd lit. Evelyn sat wrapping the cloak tighter. They ate dry bread and meat in tense silence. At some point, Evelyn slipped on a patch of slick earth while climbing a ridge. Kyle caught her with one hand, steadying her as if she weighed nothing. She pulled back quickly, embarrassed by how safe his grip felt. Kyle didn't comment. He simply showed her where to place her feet, how to step around roots instead of over them, how to listen for distant movement. "You know the land," Evelyn observed. "I know how to survive," Cale replied. "Why teach me?" she asked before she could stop herself. Cale glanced at her, because no one else did. Evelyn's throat tightened. She thought of her upbringing, dancing lessons, embroidery etiquette, everything designed to make her polished and obedient. A bird in a gilded cage. Kyle's gaze sharpened as if reading her thoughts. "Nobles raise their daughters like caged birds," he said. Evelyn's mouth twisted. "And how do you like to raise women?" Kyle's answer came immediately without a trace of humor. "I don't raise anyone," he said. "I don't keep people." The simplicity of it struck her harder than any romantic line. It opened a small crack in her fear. As the hours passed, Evelyn began to notice details she couldn't ignore. Cale's speech was too refined for a mercenary. His posture was court-trained. When Rowan spoke to him, it wasn't like a soldier to a commander, it was like a blade to its king. And strangers reacted to Cale in ways that didn't make sense. A group of villagers they passed, hard-eyed people who would normally spit at outlaws, went quiet when Cale approached. One man lowered his gaze instinctively. A woman pulled her child back as if her body recognized danger. Even when Kyle said nothing, space opened around him. Authority without effort. Evelyn finally voiced it when they stopped at a checkpoint near the Ashcroft border. No one learns to command like that in a mercenary camp, she said. Kyle didn't answer right away. He studied her as if weighing whether she deserved the truth. Then he said, "And no one learns to see through people like you do in a sewing room." Evelyn blinked. For the first time, a small, unwilling smile threatened her lips. She forced it down. She wasn't ready to be charmed, not when she still didn't know what she had tied herself to. That night, on the final stretch before reaching Ashcroft Estate, they camped under pines, where moonlight filtered through branches like pale smoke. Rowan and the men stayed at a respectful distance, far enough that Evelyn could pretend she and Cale were alone, close enough that safety remained. Evelyn sat by the fire, staring into flames that snapped and hissed. Cale was across from her, sharpening his blade with slow, steady motions. The bond between them hummed like a low note beneath everything. Evelyn couldn't ignore it anymore. "If tomorrow ends," she asked quietly, "and the wedding is ruined, you will truly let me go." Kyle's blade paused. "If that is what you want," he said. Evelyn's chest tightened. "And if I don't know what I want, silence." Kyle set the blade down. He leaned forward slightly, reaching out and brushing a loose strand of hair from Evelyn's cheek. The touch was gentle, but it sent heat through her in a way that felt terrifyingly inevitable. His eyes were darker in the firelight, gold-edged with shadow. "Don't ask questions like that," he murmured, voice rough, "unless you're ready to hear the answer." Evelyn's breath caught. She didn't pull away. For one suspended moment, they leaned toward each other, close enough that Evelyn could feel his warmth, could sense the tension in him, like a predator holding itself back. "Then, sir." Rowan's voice cut the moment clean in half. Cale's jaw tightened. He didn't look away from Evelyn, but his hand dropped. Rowan stepped closer. Expression grim. "We need to speak now." Evelyn stood too quickly, flushing, as if she'd been caught doing something improper. Kyle rose slowly, eyes unreadable. He followed Rowan a few paces away. Evelyn watched, heart pounding, the interrupted moment burning on her skin like a mark. She didn't hear what Rowan said, but she saw Rowan's posture. Not a man giving advice, a man demanding truth. A few minutes later, Kyle returned. "Come," he said. Evelyn's stomach tightened. What Kyle didn't answer. He led her to a small clearing where Rowan stood waiting. Rowan didn't greet Evelyn as a servant would greet a noblewoman. He bowed deeply, formally. Evelyn's breath caught. Rowan went down on one knee before Kyle. "Permit me to speak on your behalf," Rowan said. Evelyn froze. Kyle's expression tightened. He didn't stop Rowan. Rowan lifted his head and looked directly at Evelyn. "The man you stand beside is not a mercenary," Rowan said clearly. "He is Cale Draven, rightful heir of Thornrealm." Evelyn felt the world tilt. "Thornrealm," she whispered. Rowan continued, each sentence striking like a bell. "House Draven ruled the northern werewolf kingdoms for generations. 10 years ago, Duke Alaric led a coup. He stole the throne. He hunted Draven blood. Cale Draven was forced into exile." Evelyn stared at Kyle. "You—" Her voice failed. "I married—" Cale's gaze held hers. "Yes," he said quietly. "You married the exiled heir." Evelyn's mind spun. Royalty. A throne. A war. She had tried to escape being used as a political piece, and had stepped into the center of an entire kingdom's conflict. Kyle's mouth tightened slightly, as if anticipating her reaction. "I haven't reclaimed the crown," he added dryly, "so don't look too impressed." Evelyn couldn't breathe. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, voice rising. Kyle's expression didn't soften. "Because you would have stopped choosing?" Evelyn's hands curled into fists. "I already chose." "Under the moon." Yes, Cale said. And you chose me as a man, not as a crown. Evelyn's chest hurt with anger and fear. You let me kneel before you in desperation, she said, voice shaking. You let me offer you gold like a fool. Cale's eyes darkened. You weren't a fool. Evelyn laughed, sharply bitter. I was. I was trying to survive. And you did? Cale replied. Evelyn stepped back, heart racing. Do you understand what this means? I fled one cage and stepped into a larger one. A throne is still a cage. A kingdom is still, I won't keep you with chains. Cale cut in voice low steady. If you wish to leave after tomorrow, I will release every vow the law allows me to release. Evelyn stared. You can do that, I can do what is possible, Cale said, and I will not trap you. Something in his words, something honest and almost weary, made Evelyn falter. He wasn't promising a fairy tale. He was promising freedom even if it cost him. Cale took a slow breath. I hid my name because I wanted one moment in my life, he said quietly, where someone chose me before they saw what I wore on my shoulders. Evelyn's throat tightened. She understood the desire, understood it too well, because she had never been seen as Evelyn, either only as Ashcroft's daughter, Ashcroft's bargaining chip. But understanding didn't erase the fear. And what about my father, Evelyn demanded? What about Magnus? What about the war you just dragged me into by existing? Cale's gaze sharpened. The war existed before you, before me even. Tomorrow it simply stops being hidden. Evelyn turned away, breathing hard. She wanted to hate him. She couldn't fully, because even now he stood a step back, giving her space. Not grabbing her, not forcing her, waiting as if her choice still mattered. They approached Ashcroft Estate as the day climbed toward afternoon. The manor rose ahead like a pale fortress, beautiful, cold, prepared for celebration that felt like violence. Kyle stopped just before the tree line. Rowan and the men arranged themselves with the precision of soldiers who understood timing. Evelyn's heart beat painfully. So this is your plan, Evelyn said. You won't enter with me. Kyle shook his head. Not yet, she swallowed. They'll think I failed. They should, Cale replied. They should see you stand there. They should see your father's satisfaction. Magnus's arrogance, Seraphine's laughter. Evelyn flinched at the thought. Kyle stepped closer, voice lowering. If I come too early, he said, they will say you were enchanted, threatened, coerced. They will make you the victim again. His gaze locked on hers. I want them to watch you choose otherwise. Evelyn's breath caught. She hated that part of her, thrilled at the idea, not because she wanted spectacle, because she wanted justice. I want them to see, Evelyn whispered. Cale nodded once as if that was all he needed. He took her hand, not possessive, not demanding, just steady. Trust me, he said. Evelyn's fingers tightened around his. I'm trying, she admitted. Kyle held her gaze a moment longer, then released her hand with obvious effort. Rowan stepped forward. Two men in Ashcroft colors guards Cale had intercepted and compelled approached as if escorting Evelyn under capture. To anyone watching from the manor walls, it would look like she'd been found and dragged back. Evelyn pulled her hood lower and walked forward, forcing her steps not to falter. Behind her, Kyle disappeared into the trees with Rowan and the royal guard vanishing like a secret. Evelyn's heart clenched. For the first time since she'd left the manor last night, she was alone again, and the estate was waiting to swallow her. Inside, chaos disguised as celebration filled the corridors. Servants rushed with floral arrangements and ribbons. Musicians tuned instruments. Nobles arrived in bright clothing and false smiles. The moment Evelyn entered, her father's fury hit her like a physical blow. Cedric Ashcroft's eyes were cold enough to freeze blood. So he said quietly, stepping close enough that no one else heard, You thought you could embarrass House Ashcroft? Evelyn didn't answer. Cedric's mouth tightened. You will walk down that aisle, you will smile, you will marry Lord Magnus, and you will never shame me again. Evelyn lifted her chin. I won't marry him. Cedric's face flickered shock, then rage, then he masked it again. You will, he said softly, because you have nowhere else to go. Evelyn didn't reply. Because she did, even if she didn't fully understand what it meant. Servants stripped her cloak away and dressed her again in the white gown. They tightened the corset until her ribs protested. They pinned pearls at her throat. Evelyn let them, not because she was obedient, because she was waiting. Seraphine appeared in the doorway like a shadow draped in silk, smiling with lazy cruelty. "I heard you ran," Seraphine said. "How romantic." Evelyn stared at her. "I heard you enjoy being second." Seraphine's smile sharpened. "Better second to a powerful man than first to a dead one." Then Magnus entered. He wore ceremonial black with silver trim, his hair combed back, his expression pleased. He walked straight to Evelyn, cupped her cheek as if she belonged to him already. Evelyn's stomach turned. Her wolf snarled inside her. Magnus leaned closer, whispering so only she could hear. After today, he murmured, "I will teach you what happens to wives who try to run." Evelyn met his gaze, eyes steady. "You will try," she said. Magnus's smile widened, amused by what he thought was a bluff. Outside, music began to swell. The wedding procession was starting. A servant came to the door. "My lord, my lady, it is time." Evelyn's heart hammered. She touched the pouch at her waist, lighter now, emptier because she'd left everything with Cale. She had given away her fortune for one chance. Now she had to believe that chance would arrive. They led her into the great hall. It was packed with nobles and alpha lords, the room glowing with candlelight and expensive perfume. The whispers hit her immediately. She ran. They dragged her back. Poor thing, disgraceful. Evelyn walked forward with her head held high, even as humiliation tried to crawl under her skin. Magnus waited at the altar, smiling like victory. Her father sat with rigid pride. Seraphine watched with gleaming eyes. Evelyn reached the front. The priest lifted his hands. "Under moon and blood," he began. "We gather." Magnus extended his hand toward Evelyn. "Give me your hand," he said softly, and his fingers closed around her wrist before she could refuse grip firm enough to bruise. Evelyn's breath caught. She turned her head slightly, eyes cutting toward the great doors of the hall. They were closed, massive, still. No sound from beyond them, no movement, no sign. Her pulse stumbled. Magnus's grip tightened. "Enough games," he murmured. "You're done running." The priest spoke again, louder. "Lady Evelyn Ashcroft, will you?" Evelyn's throat went dry. The doors remained shut. A cold, horrible thought slid into her mind like poison. What if he didn't come? What if Cale had left her? What if she had trusted the wrong man again? Magnus's voice brushed her ear. "Smile," he whispered, "or I'll make sure your screams are the only music they remember." The great doors stayed shut. Evelyn stared at them as if she could force them open with will alone, as if the weight of her hope could become a lever, strong enough to move iron and stone. Nothing, no footsteps, no echo, no shadow sliding beneath the seam. Magnus's fingers tightened around her wrist until pain sparked bright and sharp. He didn't squeeze hard enough for others to notice. He was too practiced for that, but hard enough that she felt the message in her bones. "You belong to me." The priest's voice carried through the hall again, calm and ceremonial. "Lady Evelyn Ashcroft, under moon and blood, do you?" Evelyn's throat went dry. The room blurred at the edges, not from tears, but from the sudden rush of fear. Her wolf, already snarling inside her, pressed against her ribs, frantic, furious, desperate to flee. The worst thought slipped in like a blade. What if he didn't come? What if Cale's promise had been another story men told to get what they wanted? Magnus leaned closer, his breath warm at her ear. "Smile," he murmured, soft enough that only she could hear. "Or I'll make sure the only thing they remember about you is the sound you make when you learn obedience." Evelyn's jaw clenched. Her hands trembled, not with surrender, but with the effort of holding herself together. Across the hall, her father sat rigidly at the head of a row of nobles, posture stiff with pride. He looked as if he'd already erased her escape from memory, already rewritten it into a story where he remained the dignified ruler, and she remained the foolish daughter, corrected by discipline. Cedric's gaze met hers for a brief second. There was no sympathy in it, only command. Evelyn's stomach churned. Seraphine sat several seats away, elegant as a blade. She didn't even bother hiding her smile. She lifted her glass slightly as if toasting Evelyn's humiliation. The priest waited, hands raised, eyes on Evelyn. The whole kingdom held its breath. Magnus's grip tightened again. "Answer," he whispered. Evelyn forced her lips apart. A voice cut through the air from the crowd. "Disgrace." A woman's laugh followed, sharp and quiet. Evelyn's cheeks burned, but she kept her chin lifted. She would not break in front of them. Not again. Lady Evelyn the priest prompted, more firmly now. "Do you accept Lord Magnus Fortane as your husband under the moon's witness?" Magnus leaned closer, a smile hidden behind ceremony. "Say yes," he breathed, "and you live." Evelyn's wolf slammed against the cage of her ribs like an animal throwing itself at bars. She tasted iron in her mouth. And then a sound. Not footsteps, not a whisper. A single brutal impact that shook the back of the hall as if thunder had struck stone. The great doors trembled. Candles near the entrance flickered their flames, bending hard as cold wind pressed against them. Magnus froze. Evelyn's heart stopped for half a beat. Another ooter. The doors didn't creak open. They exploded. Iron hinges screamed. Wood cracked like bone. A shock of wind tore through the hall, snuffing several candles and scattering petals from the aisle runner. Nobles gasped and flinched back. The priest stumbled, clutching his robes. Evelyn turned her head so fast her neck ached. And there, through the drifting dust and the sudden storm of torchlight, someone stepped into the doorway. Not a mercenary, not a shadow, not a nameless man in a tavern corner. Kyle. He wore war regalia, the color of midnight and steel, the kind that swallowed light rather than reflected it. A heavy cloak dark as storm clouds hung from his shoulders like a banner. The breastplate on his chest bore the crest of a wolf crowned with silver points. A sword rode at his hip, its hilt marked with ancient symbols Evelyn didn't recognize, but felt in her bones to be older than Ashcroft itself. The scar along his jaw didn't make him less beautiful. It made him look like a king pulled out of war and set down in a room of polished liars. Behind him marched men in disciplined formation, royal guards with dark armor and bright eyes moving as one body. And between them rose black and silver banners that unfurled like wings. A whispered word rippled through the crowd like a shiver. Draven, an older alpha in the front row, stood halfway up, face pale. "No," he breathed. "It can't be." Kyle didn't hurry. He walked forward with a calm that was not peace but certainty. Each step struck the stone like a statement. "I am here. I am real. I am not asking permission." Pressure filled the hall, thick and invisible. Evelyn felt it on her skin and Alpha's dominance. Yes, but not like Magnus's crude force. This was something deeper. Bloodline. Command born into bone. Every wolf in the room felt it. She saw it in the way shoulders stiffened, in the way breath caught, in the way eyes shifted away without meaning to. Magnus's grip on Evelyn loosened for the first time since he'd touched her. Not because he chose to release her, because his wolf recognized a stronger one. Kyle stopped several paces away from the altar. He let silence stretch until the entire hall was trapped inside it. Then Rowan stepped forward, voice sharp as drawn steel. "Kneel," Rowan said, loud enough to cut through every heartbeat. "Kneel before Cale Draven, rightful heir of Thorn Realm, Alpha Crown, heir of the Draven bloodline." For a second the hall resisted, pride shock, confusion. Then the first kneel happened. An old alpha face lined with years and regret dropped to one knee, as if his body remembered a vow his mind had tried to forget. And then it spread like fire. Nobles sank down. Guards knelt, servants fell to the floor. Even the most arrogant wolves in the room bowed their heads because dominance was not a matter of preference. It was nature's law. Evelyn watched it happen in stunned, silent disbelief. Her father's face went gray. He stumbled back a step, then dropped to his knees so quickly he nearly fell forward. "My prince," he stammered. Your grace." Magnus stayed standing for a heartbeat longer, muscles, rigid jaw clenched. Evelyn saw him fighting it, fighting the instinct to submit, fighting humiliation. Then Kyle lifted his gaze. Just a look. Magnus's wolf reacted before his pride could stop it. He gritted his teeth and lowered himself to one knee, hands trembling with restrained fury. The sound of knees hitting stone echoed like a verdict. Only one person remained standing. Evelyn. She stood in the center aisle in a white wedding gown. She now hated surrounded by a room kneeling to the man she'd hired in desperation. Her heart thudded so hard it hurt. In her mind, one thought repeated helpless and sharp. What have I done? Kyle walked to her as if the sea of kneeling bodies wasn't there, as if the entire room was only background. He stopped directly in front of her. His eyes, gold in torchlight, held hers with a steady intensity that made her forget how to breathe. Lift your head, Evelyn, he said low but clear enough that everyone heard. You do not kneel to anyone here. The words hit her spine like a shock. Not because they were romantic, because they were permission. Permission to exist as more than property. Evelyn realized her chin had dipped slightly in unconscious response to all that power around her. She forced it up. Kyle's gaze softened a fraction. Something like approval, something like pride. Magnus spoke first voice raw with rage and panic. You have no right, he snapped. He pushed up from his kneel, halfway defying the pressure with trembling muscles. You have no right to interfere with a lawful contract between House Ashcroft and House Fortain. Kel didn't look at him immediately. He lifted his hand palm outward. Rowan stepped forward with a small black and silver box. He opened it, revealing a strip of dark cloth bound around two pieces of fabric stained with dried blood. Evelyn's breath caught. The moon oath. Kyle took it with a careless ease that made the object look weightless. I have more right than you think, Kale said, voice cold. He turned to the priest. Read. The priest's hands shook as he accepted the cloth. He stared at it, then swallowed, face draining of color. This, the priest whispered, this is a lawful moon vow. The hall erupted in murmurs, shocked, disbelieving. The priest continued, voice trembling. Witnessed under the moon, sealed in blood, freely given by both parties. Kyle's gaze swept the room, once sharp and deliberate. She married me under moon law before she stepped into this hall, he said. Cedric jerked his head up, eyes wide. That's impossible, Kyle cut him off without raising his voice. You signed your daughter like cattle beneath moon registry. He said, each word clipped and precise. But you forgot something. He stepped closer to Evelyn, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the heat of him. Moon law recognizes willing choice above forced contract. The priest bowed his head, voice quiet but clear. Under the old law, when a lawful vow has been made, all prior betrothals are void. Magnus's face twisted. I don't recognize this. He snarled. This is a trick. Kale finally turned toward him. The look in his eyes burned like metal in a forge. The air in the hall thickened heavy enough to press against lungs. Kyle released dominance without restraint. Silver goblets on nearby tables trembled. A few weaker alphas gasped, forced down by instinct foreheads, nearly touching the floor. The priest swayed as if caught in a wind no one else could see. Magnus stiffened, throat tightening as though an invisible hand had closed around it. His eyes widened in panic. Kale's fingers flexed. Claws slid into view, just enough to remind everyone that the crown did not tame the beast it commanded it. You don't recognize it? Kyle said, voice dropping into something close to a growl. He stepped one pace closer. Do you intend to challenge the moon itself? Magnus's lips parted. He couldn't speak for a moment. His wolf was forced into submission, pressed down by a dominance it could not resist. Evelyn watched, shocked by the clarity of it. Kale was not simply powerful, he was built to break defiance. Kale turned back to Evelyn and extended his hand. The gesture wasn't a command, it was an offer. Evelyn looked at his hand. Then she looked at the hall, at her father, kneeling at Seraphine's pale face, at Magnus's trembling rage. Then she placed her hand in Kale's. Kale's fingers closed around hers with a steady warmth that made her chest ache unexpectedly. He faced the room with their hands linked. She stands under my protection, Kyle said, voice carrying to every corner. From the moment she chose me, no one here has the right to touch her without her consent. The emphasis was subtle but impossible to miss. She chose me. Not he took her. Not he bought her. Not he claimed her without will. She chose. Evelyn felt something shift inside her. Not relief exactly, something sharper and brighter. Selfhood. A nobleman in the crowd spoke, voice shaking. But the dowry Cale didn't even glance at him. Irrelevant, he said. He turned slightly, gaze landing on Cedric. As for House Ashcroft, Cale said calm as ice, you will learn what it means to mistake your daughter for property. Cedric's mouth worked soundlessly. Seraphine stood abruptly, anger flashing across her face. This is ridiculous, she hissed. You can't simply take her, and Cale's eyes flicked toward her. Seraphine's words died in her throat. Her body stiffened under dominance, and she sat back down as if forced. Cale returned his attention to Evelyn, and his voice softened by a fraction only for her. Come, he said. Evelyn hesitated. Not because she wanted to stay, because the room was spinning, because the reality of it, the kingdom kneeling, the wedding destroyed, the man beside her, revealed as something far larger than she'd imagined, was too much for one breath. Kyle squeezed her hand. Just once. A grounding touch. Evelyn lifted her chin and walked with him out of the aisle. They moved toward a private corridor, meant for royal guests, an old passage Ashcroft had never used, kept for visiting rulers. Kyle's guards shifted to create a path. Nobles flattened themselves further as he passed. Magnus's voice cracked behind them. She is mine. Kyle didn't even turn. His answer was a cold sentence flung over his shoulder like a blade. Not anymore. The doors to the side corridor closed, and the roar of the hall vanished as if cut with a knife. In the guest chamber beyond, silence pressed in. It wasn't peaceful. It was dense, charged, full of everything that hadn't been said. Evelyn's breath came too fast. She stared at the rich carpet beneath her feet as if it might offer stability. Kyle stood a few paces away, posture still controlled, though Evelyn could see tension in his shoulders. She turned on him. She did not cry. That was the dangerous part. Why didn't you tell me? Evelyn's voice came out low and shaking, not with fear, but with fury. Kyle didn't flinch. I intended to, he said, after it was done. Evelyn let out a short laugh that sounded like pain. After it was done, she repeated, after I walked into a hall and the entire kingdom knelt to the man I tried to hire with gold. She stepped closer. After I found out my father had his hands in your exile, her voice sharpened. After I realized I just married myself into a war, Kyle held her gaze unmoving. Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides. I ran because I refused to be a pawn. So what now? I only changed boards. Silence stretched. For the first time, Kyle looked tired, not weak, tired like someone who had been carrying a burden alone for too long. Because I wanted one moment, Cale said slowly, where you chose me without seeing the title first. Evelyn's breath caught. Kyle continued, voice quieter. If I told you I was Cale Draven in that tavern, you would not have been able to stay honest. You would have looked at me and seen a throne, an alliance, a danger. His eyes locked on hers. I wanted to know whether you chose me or what I represent. Evelyn's jaw tightened. So you decided for me that I didn't deserve the truth. Kyle's gaze held, then he nodded once. No, he said simply. That part was my fault. The admission hit her harder than denial would have. Kyle took a slow breath. If you want to leave after tomorrow, after the dust settles, I will release every vow I can. Evelyn scoffed, bitter. You speak as if anything will be simple after today. Kyle didn't argue. He didn't soothe her with lies. He stepped closer, only half a pace careful. I cannot promise you peace, he said, but I can promise you one thing. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. What? His voice dropped, steady and serious. I will never make you my prisoner. The words struck the exact fear she'd been choking on since the reveal. Evelyn wanted to believe him. She wasn't ready to. Her anger didn't disappear. It tangled with something else, something more dangerous. Trust trying to form against her will. Before she could speak again, the door opened and Rowan stepped in. Face grim. Your Grace, Rowan said, voice controlled. The news has already traveled. Cale's posture hardened instantly, the softness vanishing like a candle snuffed. Rowan continued. Neutral lords have heard you declared yourself publicly. Duke Alaric's scouts have moved along the northern border. Signals were sent before we even reached the corridor. Evelyn felt cold crawl up her spine. Rowan added Lord Magnus requested leave from the hall. He claimed he would not interfere further. Kyle's mouth curled into something close to contempt. He will choose whichever side looks like it will win. Evelyn swallowed. So today wasn't only about saving me. Kyle's gaze slid to her. Today, he said quietly, I declared that I am alive. The weight of that sentence settled into the room. It meant war. It meant upheaval. It meant everything in her life had just cracked open. Kyle turned to Rowan. Double the guard outside her rooms, he ordered. No one enters without my word. Evelyn stiffened. I don't need to be watched like a prisoner. Kyle's head snapped toward her eyes, sharp. That isn't imprisonment, he said. That is what it looks like when enemies are coming. Evelyn opened her mouth, then shut it again, because she understood. But understanding didn't erase the sour taste of being guarded after a life of being controlled. Kyle's voice softened slightly. If you want the door opened, it opens, he said. If you want to walk out, you walk out. Just his jaw clenched. Just don't walk out alone. Evelyn stared at him for a long moment. Then she gave a single nod. Not thanks, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. For Kale. It looked like something he didn't deserve but desperately needed. Night fell over Ashcroft Estate, with the quiet violence of a storm rolling in. The manor was full of murmurs, nobles whispering in corners, servants rushing with frightened eyes, guards shifting positions too often. News traveled faster than fire in dry grass. Kyle Draven has returned. Kyle Draven stood in Ashcroft's great hall and made the kingdom kneel. Kyle Draven took Evelyn Ashcroft as his wife under moon law. Evelyn sat alone in the guest chamber, finally freed from the wedding gown. Her hair was loose. Her skin still felt too tight from the corset, as if her body had forgotten how to breathe without restraint. Tessa was allowed in, one of the few permitted. The maid entered as if she feared the walls might punish her for existing. The moment she saw Evelyn, Tessa's composure shattered. She rushed forward and wrapped her arms around her. My lady, she whispered, voice breaking. I thought I would never see this day. Evelyn's throat tightened. She hugged her back hard. I'm here, she whispered. I'm still here. A sound outside the door, short wrong too quick, made Evelyn go rigid. It wasn't the steady pacing of guards. It was a sudden scuff, then silence. Tessa pulled back, eyes widening. Something's wrong. Evelyn's wolf lifted its head instantly. Before Evelyn could move, the window behind them flew open. Cold air burst into the room. Two shadows dropped inside like predators. Tessa gasped, but a cloth pressed over her mouth before she could scream. Her eyes rolled as the smell of drugs hit her. She struggled for a second, then went limp. Evelyn snatched a heavy brass candle holder from the table and swung it. It connected with one man's shoulder. He grunted, stumbling. The other grabbed Evelyn from behind, locking her arms. Evelyn kicked, elbowed, fought, fierce and desperate, but the grip was trained, cruelly efficient. A voice hissed near her ear. Alive, the man said. Duke Alaric wants her intact. Evelyn's heart slammed. Alaric. Before she could spit a reply, a second cloth pressed against her mouth. The scent hit her sweet, heavy wrong. Evelyn thrashed, trying to bite, to twist away. Too late? The room blurred. The edges of the world went dark. But the last thing Evelyn felt was not the drug. It was the bond. That thin thread formed under moon oath, the one that had been humming softly since the clearing suddenly yanked hard, as if someone had torn her out of the place she belonged. A jolt like lightning shot through her chest, and somewhere far away, something answered. Kale was in the corridor outside Rowan's temporary command room when the bond hit him. It wasn't a thought, it was instinct. A sudden spike of fear that wasn't his slicing through him like a claw. His hand closed around a silver goblet on a nearby table. The metal crumpled, the goblet shattered. Rowan turned sharply. Your Grace, Kale's breath went harsh. His vision narrowed, the world sharpened into scent and sound. He smelled her terror as if it were in the air. He heard her heartbeat as if it were his. His eyes burned gold. A low, broken growl climbed up his throat. Rowan went still. He'd seen Kale fight, he'd seen Kale command, he'd never seen Kale look like this. Cal's voice came out rough, distorted by something primal. They touched her. Rowan's hand went to his sword instantly, where Cal's head lifted eyes unfocused as if he could track her through stone. Find them, Kale snarled. Now. Rowan moved fast. Orders snapped out. Guards surged. Within minutes, one of the infiltrators was caught in a corridor, alive, trembling, foolish enough to think he could hide. Kyle didn't even question him. He simply stepped close enough to drown the man in dominance. The infiltrator's knees hit stone. Where Kyle's voice was a growl, the man shook violently. Or a ridge pass. Old stone outpost. North Rowan cut in sharp. The abandoned garrison in the Rockwood confirm. The man nodded frantically. Kyle turned without another word. Rowan caught up to him at the doors. Your Grace, he said. Fast, urgent, if you shift fully, now you may reach her, but you may not be able to tell enemy from ally. Kyle's hands were shaking. Claws flickered in and out at his fingertips. Breathe, Rowan said hard. Breathe, or you will destroy your own men before you reach her. Kale's chest heaved. For a heartbeat, he looked like he might rip apart the stone itself. Then slowly, something in him obeyed. Not calm, control, barely. Rowan signaled the elite riders. Now he barked, move. They plunged into the night. And as the distance closed, the bond pulsed again, her fear sharper, closer. Kyle's throat filled with a sound that wasn't quite human. Rowan rode beside him, eyes fixed forward. Jaw clenched as if bracing for the storm Kyle was becoming. Evelyn woke to the sound of wheels and the sting of rope cutting into her wrists. She lay on a hard surface inside a covered iron carriage, moving fast through uneven forest paths. Her head swam. Her mouth tasted bitter. She forced herself to breathe through it. Not panic, not tears, information. She turned her head slightly, listening. Hoofbeats outside. At least 4 riders, voices low and tense. She shifted her wrists, testing the rope. Tight. Too tight to slip without injury. She inhaled carefully, smelling damp moss and cold stone rockwood terrain, steep slopes, close trees. She memorized the rhythm of the wheels, the direction of wind hitting the carriage, the slight tilt that suggested they were climbing north. Then the fabric flap at the side lifted. Magnus's face appeared smug and cruel. If you'd been obedient, he said, none of this would be necessary. Evelyn stared at him. Voice calm despite the fear trying to claw up her throat. You say that as if I ruined tonight, she said. Wasn't it you who knelt to the man you hate? Magnus's eyes flashed. His hand tightened on the flap. You little Evelyn leaned forward just enough to make the rope bite, just enough to show she was willing to hurt herself to keep speaking. It's not Kale you want to punish, she said. It's the memory of your own humiliation. Magnus's mouth twisted. For a second she saw its shame, raw and furious. Then he dropped the flap and rode ahead as if afraid she might say something that cracked him further. Good. If she couldn't fight with her body, she would fight with words. They arrived at a ruined stone outpost before dawn, an old garrison with broken walls and a courtyard swallowed by weeds. Banners hung from the higher stones Alaric's colors. Evelyn was dragged inside but not thrown into a filthy corner like a worthless captive. They put her in a small chamber with a barred window. She wasn't being treated as prey. She was being held as leverage. Evelyn noted it, filed it away. A young guard brought water, avoiding her eyes. Evelyn lowered her voice, gentle, almost tired. Do you truly believe Duke Alaric rewards men who fail against Kale Draven? She asked. The guard froze. His fear flickered across his face before he masked it. Evelyn smiled faintly. There it is. They're afraid of him, even here, after everything. Hours later, Duke Alaric came. He entered like a man stepping into a ballroom, clean boots, fine coat. A smile too polite for the place. He studied Evelyn with careful interest. I understand why Kale returned publicly for you, Alaric said. You're beautiful, yes. But more importantly, you're intelligent enough to be dangerous. Evelyn met his smile with one of her own colder. You kidnapped the lawful wife of the Draven heir within Ashcroft territory, she said. I think you're the one who enjoys danger. Alaric's smile sharpened. A wife, he repeated, amused. Is that what he calls you? Evelyn kept her expression smooth. Under moon law, it's what I am. Alaric leaned closer. And what do you want? Lady Evelyn tilted her head as if considering. To live, Alaric chuckled. Honest, I like that. Evelyn let a small pause stretch, then said lightly, Tell me, Duke, how many of your men truly want to die for you? Cale isn't a rumor anymore. He walked into Ashcroft's hall and made the kingdom kneel. Fear travels faster than loyalty. Alaric's eyes narrowed. It was a small seed, but she saw it land. She continued quiet but deliberate. If I were you, I'd worry less about defeating him and more about which of your commanders will open a gate for him when the time comes. Alaric stared at her for a long moment, then straightened. You speak like a queen, he said softly. Evelyn's stomach tightened. She didn't answer. Alaric smiled again, and this time there was no warmth in it. We will see what you become, he said and left. Later, Magnus returned. He stormed into her chamber like a man trying to reclaim control. His eyes were wild with rage. Evelyn didn't flinch. She looked at him and spoke softly as if offering him mercy. You didn't bring me here to win, she said. You brought me here because you couldn't stand the thought of the entire hall watching you kneel. Magnus slammed his fist into the wall. Shut up. Evelyn's smile didn't reach her eyes. If you were truly strong, you wouldn't need anyone's permission to touch me. You wouldn't need Alaric to hold me for you. Magnus surged forward, face twisted, then stopped as guards moved in behind him. Alaric's men, watching. Magnus's chest heaved. He swallowed his rage like poison. Evelyn felt a grim satisfaction. She'd done it. She'd split them. She'd slowed them. Now she only had to last. Or if Cale didn't come, find another way. But deep in her chest, beneath the fear, the bond pulsed. Not a promise, a presence, as if somewhere in the night a predator was already on the hunt. The outpost shook with the first impact, not a siege engine, not a planned assault. A single force slamming into iron and stone like a storm. Guards shouted, boots pounded, metal rang. Evelyn stood at the barred window, heart hammering. Then she heard it. A roar, deep, raw animal carrying through the stone like thunder. Her wolf lifted its head and answered silently. He's here. Magnus burst into her chamber, grabbing her arm. Move, he snarled. Before he gets inside, Evelyn yanked back. You're afraid, she said, breathless, almost laughing. Magnus's hand rose and pain flashed as his palm struck her cheek. Evelyn's head snapped to the side. Stars burst behind her eyes. Magnus grabbed her again, trying to drag her toward a side door. Go, he hissed. The door exploded inward. Wood flew. Dust and cold air rushed in. Kyle stood in the doorway amid broken hinges and torchlight. He was not fully shifted, but he was close enough to make the difference. Meaningless. Shoulders broader, eyes, blazing gold breath, harsh claws, visible teeth bared. Evelyn had never seen anything so terrifying. Not because it was ugly, because it was truth. This was what a royal alpha looked like when his mate was threatened. Magnus froze. His grip on Evelyn faltered. Cale's gaze landed on Evelyn first. Not on Magnus. Not on the guards. On her. It was a single heartbeat of recognition. Then his eyes flicked to the red mark blooming on her cheek. Something in Cale's face went still. The air changed. Magnus tried to move Evelyn in front of him like a shield. Kyle's roar filled the chamber and blew out the candles. The darkness lasted only a second long enough for Evelyn to feel it, not see it. Then torchlight from the corridor flared, and Magnus was airborne. Cale had hit him so hard he slammed into the stone wall and crumpled, gasping. Alaric's men rushed in. Rowan's guards collided with them outside. The corridor became a storm of metal and shouting. Kyle took one step toward Evelyn. Evelyn tried to move, but her wrists were still bound. Kyle's claws flashed. Rope snapped. His hands, still trembling with rage, cupped Evelyn's face with surprising gentleness, thumb brushing near the bruise. Are you hurt? His voice was distorted, barely human. Evelyn swallowed, breath shaking. I'm alive. Cale's gaze flicked down to the ropes, the mark, the fear in her eyes. Something in him broke. He turned away from her with a snarl and lunged toward the nearest enemy. Evelyn flinched. Cale moved like an avalanche, unstoppable, violent, focused. In moments, the room was cleared, but Kyle didn't stop. He stalked toward a fallen guard claws, lifting as if to tear into him again. Rowan stepped into the doorway, then froze. He saw it. Kale had gone too far into blood rage. In that state, anyone, enemy, ally was only movement. Rowan opened his mouth, then shut it. He knew better than to approach. Evelyn's hands shook. Her cheek throbbed, but she stepped forward anyway. Kyle, she said, not loud. He didn't react. Evelyn took another step, forcing her voice steadier. Kyle, look at me. Kyle's shoulders twitched. His breath came in harsh pulls. His eyes were still wild. Evelyn moved closer, ignoring Rowan's sharp intake of breath behind her. My Lady Rowan began. Evelyn didn't stop. She reached up slowly, palm open, and touched Kale's cheek. His skin was hot. His jaw clenched under her fingers. Kyle, Evelyn whispered, I'm here. You found me? For a moment, Kale didn't seem to understand language. Then his eyes shifted, focusing on her face. The rage in them trembled as if struggling against recognition. Evelyn stroked his cheek, once gentle but firm. No one touches me anymore, she said softly. It's over. Kyle's entire body shuddered as if he'd been held taut like a bowstring and was finally allowed to loosen. He dropped to one knee in front of her. Not in submission, in exhaustion, in relief. His forehead nearly touched her abdomen as if his body needed proof she was real and close. Rowan turned his head away and signaled his men to pull back. The storm outside continued, but inside this room, time slowed. Evelyn rested her hand on Kyle's shoulder, feeling the tremor there. You're safe, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant him or herself. Kyle's voice came out broken. They touched you. Evelyn swallowed. I'm here. Kale's fingers tightened around her wrists, not to restrain, but to anchor himself. And slowly, very slowly, he lifted his head and looked at her again, eyes still gold, but no longer lost. When the outpost was secured and Alaric's men were driven back into the woods, Rowan insisted they move to safer ground. They found a sheltered clearing behind the ruined walls where moonlight fell through broken stone like pale water. Kyle sat on a cracked step, posture heavy. He looked more human now, though the tension still lived under his skin, ready to snap. Evelyn sat opposite him, hands wrapped around a cloak Rowan had given her. She couldn't stop shaking, not from cold, but from what had almost happened. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Evelyn said quietly, that bond. It isn't just the moon. Vow, is it? Kale's eyes closed briefly as if he'd hoped he could postpone this conversation. No, he admitted. Evelyn stared at him. I felt you when I was taken, she said. I felt you, your rage. It was like thunder in my veins. Kyle opened his eyes, and for once there was no careful mask. Not just rage, he said. Then he said the next words slowly as if they were heavy. I recognized you as my mate from the first moment. Evelyn's breath caught. Kale's gaze held hers. The night you walked into that tavern, he continued quietly. My wolf knew. Evelyn's mind raced back through everything, his restraint, his intensity, the way he always stopped, just short of pushing her the way he asked for her choice again and again. You didn't tell me, she whispered. Kale's jaw tightened. Because you had been betrayed and sold, he said. If I said mate, then if I spoke of fate and bonds, you would have thought I was trapping you with prettier chains? Evelyn swallowed hard. Kyle's voice dropped and something raw edged into it. I could have marked you that night, he said. No one would have stopped me if I chose it, but I refused to be the same kind of man you were running from. Evelyn stared, heart aching. I wanted you to walk toward me, Kyle said, not be dragged. Silence filled the space between them, thick with everything Evelyn didn't know how to name. Finally, she asked, and if I never chose again? Kale didn't hesitate. Then I still would have protected you. The answer wasn't romantic. It was devastating, because it meant his devotion wasn't a bargain. It was a decision he'd made long before she understood she had the right to decide anything. Evelyn rose slowly and stepped closer. Kale remained seated, exhausted from holding back both his beast and his crown. For once, the physical imbalance between them shifted. She stood above him not as prey, but as someone with power. Evelyn placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath armor. "The first time I chose you," she said, voice steady, "I was desperate." Kyle's eyes lifted to hers. Evelyn swallowed. Her eyes stung, but she didn't let tears fall. "This time," she said clearly, "I choose you because I want you." Kale's breath stuttered as if her words hit something inside him that had been held too tightly for too long. Evelyn continued, voice firm. "Not because of your throne, not because I fear Magnus, not because I need a way out." Her fingers pressed into his chest, grounding herself in the reality of him. "Because out of every man who tried to own me," she said, "you were the only one who kept handing my choice back to me." Kyle stood slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might break the moment. He rested his forehead against hers, eyes closing for a beat. "You have no idea what you just did to me," he murmured. Evelyn's mouth curved faintly, eyes bright with pain and certainty. "Yes," she whispered. "I think I do." They didn't return to Ashcroft that night. Rowan guided them to a hidden way station, old Draven territory, loyal to the bloodline guarded by wolves, who greeted Kale with fierce reverence and greeted Evelyn with cautious awe. Under the late moon, Kale asked for witnesses to an ancient rite of his line, not because law required it anymore, because truth did. Rowan stood with 2 guards in a circle of torchlight. Kale faced Evelyn, eyes steady. "Evelyn Ashcroft," he said, formal in a way he'd never been with her before. "Do you give full consent for a true claim?" No one answered for her. No one pushed her forward. Evelyn stepped closer on her own. "I do," she said softly, then louder. "I give it freely." Kyle's gaze flickered relief hunger, something almost reverent. He lifted his hand to her neck, fingers warm against her pulse. After this, he murmured, voice dropping low, "You will feel me more clearly than your own heartbeat." Evelyn's breath trembled. "Then mark me," she whispered. Kale moved slowly, giving her time to step away. She didn't. When his teeth touched the place between shoulder and neck, Evelyn tensed, not from fear, but from anticipation so sharp it felt like pain. The bite was not simply a wound, it was heat, a rushing surge that spread through her veins, turning the world bright and strange. She gasped, fingers gripping Kyle's shoulders to stay upright. Kyle held her carefully, as if she were something sacred, and when he sealed the mark with the ancient gesture, the bond snapped into place like a lock finding its key. Evelyn's senses flared. She felt Kale's emotions as if they were wind inside her chest. Fierce protectiveness, wild relief, a deep aching love he'd refused to name aloud. Kyle pressed his forehead to her neck over the fresh mark and breathed one word like a vow. "Mate." Evelyn closed her eyes, hands sliding into his hair, steadying him as much as herself. "My husband," she whispered. It wasn't a bargain anymore, not a transaction in a tavern, not a desperate oath to ruin a wedding. It was choice complete and unbroken. War came anyway, it always had been coming. Alaric had ruled for 10 years by fear and betrayal, and fear does not surrender quietly. But Kale no longer moved in shadows. He moved as a king returning to claim what was his. Neutral lords who had hesitated began to choose sides. Some joined Kale out of loyalty. Some joined out of instinct because they could feel the Draven dominance in their bones, the old bloodline waking. Alaric retreated to Black Hollow, the fortress that had once belonged to Draven before the coup. He gathered troops, he gathered allies. Magnus, desperate and furious, stood beside him trying to cling to whoever looked strongest. On a gray morning wrapped in mist, Kyle's forces arrived. Rowan commanded the left flank. Kyle led the center himself. Evelyn stood on a ridge with the advisors safeguarded but not hidden. Kyle did not lock her away. He looked back once before charging, and through the bond she felt what his eyes didn't say: "Stay. Live. I will return." The battle was brutal but not endless. Kale drove toward the heart of Black Hollow like a storm that knew its destination. Inside the fortress, Kale confronted Alaric before the old stone throne. Alaric smiled coldly, sword in hand. "An exiled beast," he said, voice smooth. You only know how to bite when cornered. Kyle's answer came steady, deadly calm. Wrong, he said. I returned to take back what was always mine. Their fight was not only steel, it was dominance, two wolves clashing for the right to rule. Stone cracked beneath their feet. Torches shook. The air itself seemed to tremble with the weight of bloodline. In the end, Cale drove Alaric to his knees in front of the throne he had stolen. Alaric's smile faltered finally into fear. Kyle did not hesitate. He ended the usurper's reign with a sentence spoken like law. And then he turned to Magnus. Magnus tried to speak first, as if words could save him. You need me, he snarled. The Vortain pack. Kyle's gaze cut through him. No, Kyle said. I never did. Magnus's face twisted. She belonged to me. Evelyn stepped forward, mark visible at her neck, her posture unshaken. The hall fell quiet enough to hear her breath. The only thing I ever belonged to Evelyn, said voice clear, was my own choice. Magnus stared at her as if he couldn't understand, as if women were not built to say sentences like that. Kyle's guard seized Magnus. Kyle did not grant him a noble death. He stripped him of territory, of title, of alpha standing. He sent him to the harsh borderlands under watch alive, broken, forced to live with the memory of kneeling and losing. Public humiliation paid back with interest. When the war ended, judgment remained. Cedric Ashcroft was brought before the council not only for selling his daughter, but for aiding the betrayal years earlier that helped Alaric rise. The council hall was packed with nobles, pack leaders, and witnesses. Kyle sat at the head crown, not yet placed, but authority already absolute. Cedric knelt, visibly aged, trembling in a way Evelyn had never seen. Kyle could have spoken the verdict. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward Evelyn. He is your father, Kyle said, voice carrying. This judgment belongs to you. The room held its breath. Evelyn stared at Cedric. Once the idea of judging her father would have been unimaginable. He had seemed permanent, untouchable. Now he looked small. Evelyn felt no satisfaction, only a quiet clarity. She stepped forward. Cedric Ashcroft, Evelyn, said voice. Even you will be stripped of your title as head of House Ashcroft. You will lose every right of negotiation under Moon Law. You will be exiled from all councils of Thornrealm. Murmurs rose. Some expected blood, some wanted it. Evelyn lifted her chin. I will not continue the cycle that raised men to believe control is a right born into their veins, she said. You will live not because you deserve mercy, but because those who come after you must see that justice is not always the face of revenge. Cedric lowered his head, unable to speak. Evelyn stepped back. In that moment, she wasn't just judging her father. She was cutting the root of the system that nearly destroyed her. Thornrealm reopened its coronation hall for the first time in 10 years. The stone was scrubbed, the banners restored. The old crest of the crowned wolf hung high again, bright in torchlight. The kingdom gathered alpha lords in ceremonial cloaks, pack leaders in darker garb, advisors, guards, and beyond the doors, a sea of common wolves filling the square. Rowan placed the crown on Cale's head with steady hands, his voice ringing, Cale Draven. Rowan declared by blood and moon rightful king of Thornrealm. The hall erupted into a roar of voices. Cale didn't bask in it. He didn't lift his chin as if the crown had changed him. He turned, and he held out his hand to Evelyn. Evelyn stepped forward wearing a gown that held none of the suffocating weight of a wedding dress. It was not an outfit chosen to please others. It was built for her dark velvet silver thread, a collar that framed the mark at her neck without hiding it. She walked up the steps with steady footing. Cale took her hand and faced the hall. When the queen's crown was brought out, Cale did not let any priest place it. He took it himself. He set it on Evelyn's head with a tenderness that made the hall fall into sudden hush. Evelyn Draven does not stand here because of bloodlines, dowries, or contracts between houses, Kyle said, voice loud and clear. She stands here because she chose, and because I chose her. The roar that followed shook the banners. Then Kyle raised his hand, and silence returned, immediate and obedient. Kyle's gaze swept the crowd, and his voice turned sharp with purpose. From today, he declared, no woman in Thornrealm will be sold, traded, or forced into marriage beneath Moon Law against her will. A stunned silence, then an eruption shouts cries approval like thunder outside the hall. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Kyle wasn't only crowning her, he was changing the world that made her. That night after the ceremonies, after the feasts and vows and speeches, Evelyn stood alone in her chamber. A tall mirror faced her framed in carved wood. In the reflection, she saw a woman wearing a crown. And behind the crown, she saw a memory herself, the night before the wedding, pale and trapped, staring at a bride she did not recognize. She touched her neck fingers, brushing the mark. It pulsed with warmth. Not a shackle, a choice. Kyle entered quietly behind her. Evelyn felt him through the bond before she heard him, the steady presence, the weight of him that now felt like home. He stopped close enough that his warmth reached her back. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. Evelyn stared at herself in the mirror for a long moment. "I used to think I had to survive that wedding," she said. Kyle's hand slid to her waist, gentle grounding. Evelyn turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "But I didn't survive it." She continued, voice steady, almost amused at the truth. "I destroyed it." Kyle's mouth curved slow and dangerous and warm. "And became my queen," he murmured. Evelyn shook her head, smile deepening. "No," she said. "I became myself first." Then she placed her hand over his, and then she added, eyes bright, "I became your queen." Kyle lowered his head and pressed a kiss to the mark at her neck. Not possessive, not claiming. Reverent. Outside the balcony, the kingdom's celebration still echoed through the night. But inside the room, the world narrowed to something simple. A woman who no longer ran. A man who had waited for her choice twice. And a future built not on contracts or cages, but on will. What started as one desperate bargain beneath the moon became the moment a woman reclaimed her freedom, brought a kingdom to its knees, and chose love on her own terms. Thank you for staying with us through this unforgettable story of power, fate, and second chances. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like the video, share your favorite moment in the comments, and subscribe for more dramatic tales of Alpha King's dangerous romance and epic betrayals. Until next time, there are many more stories waiting for you.